Jesus, at one point, there in that long dialogue, he is talking to the people, the crowd, about his take on why they followed him to the other side of the lake. And I think it would boil down to simply Jesus saying to them, you are focused on the wrong thing. They were focused on the food. If you remember from last week, if you were here, Jesus in the story last week fed a large multitude of people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And that was a great thing for those people. And Jesus is concerned that they followed him because basically they want another meal. And in fairness to these people, you do have to understand that would not have been an unreasonable thing, because Jesus didn't give them just some food. He gave them an abundance of food. You and I, most of us today, most meals that we ever eat, we can eat as much as we want. People in that day, that wasn't common for them. They had a certain amount of food and they would just consume that, often perhaps wanting more food than they had. Or to put it differently, you and I typically end a meal with leftovers. They did not. They had no leftovers. They'd eat and they would have enough to continue to live, but not really an abundance. And if you remember the story last week, they ended up with 12 baskets of leftovers, which indicates that everybody there, all those people, had a chance to eat absolutely as much as they wanted. It was a banquet, if you will. Closest thing you and I might have to get in their heads would be to think of Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. That big, lavish, way more food than is necessary. It's just kind of over the top. That's what they would have been thinking about. And so the fact that they're focused on this is not unreasonable. But Jesus offers them a better alternative. He says, you should be looking at this as a sign of God. This is not just that you ate and were satisfied and had a lot of food. This is about God. God did this. This is a gift to you from God. You need to be focused on that. And I just wonder if there are not times in our lives where you and I do the same thing. We sort of end up focusing on the wrong thing. The story I told to the students, so this was up in seminary in Boston, and Brian and I, when we first started doing all this climbing, it became pretty common where people would ask us, why are you doing this? And some of you know that supposedly Sir Edmund Hillary, when asked about trying to climb Everest, he said, because it was there. That was his answer, not much of an answer. And we found much the same thing. We could tell people about the amazing things that we saw. We could talk about the sense of accomplishment. We could talk about all of that, but it didn't seem to be the right answer. And it was Brian who came up with this idea that I mentioned to the children, that no, God gave us the ability to do this. We are using God's gift. That's what we need to focus on. When we go out, the issue isn't do we get to the top of whatever mountain we're after. The issue is, are we enjoying God's creation? Did we get a chance to get away from the seminary, spend a wonderful day in nature, whether the weather was good or bad or whatever? And by keeping that as our focus, it became a wonderful experience. For the teenagers here, I don't know, I don't want to put an idea into or I don't want you to think I'm putting an idea into your parents' heads. But when I was teaching at Tampa Catholic, it was not at all uncommon for students to drive into the parking lot someday with a new car. And of course, the teens were thrilled about the new car and they wanted to show it to everybody, all that sort of thing that you'd expect. But I think if Jesus were speaking to them, he'd say, be careful here. The new car, that's nice, that's good. But let's not focus on the new car. You should focus on your parents, because the Lord has given you parents who have the ability and the willingness to do this. And certainly not all parents have the ability to give their kids new cars. So you should be not so much grateful for the car, you should be grateful for your parents and what they do. If you see the issue, it's almost like what you're constantly trying to do is sort of bump up. You're trying to look at one level higher, if you will. You know, what is above what I'm focused on, because rather than focusing on the material thing, what are you focusing, in what way can you focus on God? If you think about this, some of you might be thinking, well, I'm making a very minor distinction. Does it really make a difference? But I think it does, actually. Because if you are in a position where you're only thinking about sort of the material side of things, you'll often find yourself in a position where you're thinking that God is only there, say, to answer my prayers. Many of you are ask us to pray for intentions, and we're happy to do it. I often wonder what people do after those intentions have been answered. Someone prays for a good test result. Someone prays for the healing of a loved one. Someone prays to get a new job. Well, what happens after that, after God grants those? Do you just say, oh, well, I'm so glad the test results came back the way I wanted them, and then move on? Or do you think of, oh, what's behind it? God. God did that. I should be grateful to God. Because the downside to not making this distinction is that you'll get caught up in the thing and forget God. And very quickly, you'll find that you're thinking of God as a genie in a bottle. You go through your life and you do what you want, and then something bad happens, and then you say, oh, need some help. And you go pull out the lamp and you rub it, and the genie comes out and you say, hey, genie, I need you to fix this. And the genie fixes it. And then the genie goes back in the lamp and you put it away, and then you go about your life again. That is not a relationship with God. That is not a relationship that's going to help you really in any way, because, of course, there's going to be a time when the Lord is going to choose not to answer your prayers the way you would like, and then you don't have an explanation for that. Genies always do what you want. So you could, if you are unwilling to focus on the right thing, it could really affect your relationship with God. And the other thing that I think getting the right focus helps is I think it's a wonderful example of stewardship. We're called to be good stewards because that whole concept of stewardship starts with the idea that everything comes from God. Our time, our talent, our gifts, all that stuff, all the things that we have, they all originate with God. When we get our paychecks, it's not, well, I earned this. I worked a long life and I earned this retirement. Yeah, you did. You worked a long life. You had a very productive couple weeks working where you work. That's all true, but God's behind it. You have a job. You have these abilities that allow you to have the job, that allow you to be successful. All that in the background comes from God. And if you keep focusing on God that way, you get your paycheck and it's not, I deserve this. It's more like, well, thanks to God, because I've got this. And that puts you in a better position then to be a steward of it. Because if you think of it as yours, this is mine, you're really going to be tempted to be very greedy about your money. But if you think about your time and your talent in terms of all coming from God, then you'll be a lot more in a better position to say, oh, I want to be a good steward of this. God gave this to me. I want to take care of it. I want to do the best with it. And so sure, I'll devote a little time to prayer. I will on a day of lousy weather where I could easily talk myself into not showing up at Mass. I'm going to go because it was safe to do so and I could. And I'm going to do that because that's a good use of my time every Sunday morning. So let's be careful what we focus on. It is a wonderful thing to be able to climb mountains. It's a wonderful thing to get new cars and be giving wonderful gifts. It's a wonderful thing to have our prayers answered. There's no doubt about that. But we always want to remember that God is behind all of that. And keeping our focus straight will really help our relationship with the Lord.